Alright guys, so it's hard to judge a movie like this. You know, when a movie comes out and it starts getting all this glaze saying it's deep, dramatic, you know, it's an award winner. And not gonna lie, like I didn't really know what this movie was about. Like obviously the movie was about fighting, right? And The Rock, you know, with prosthetics on. But besides that, like I didn't know what the story was. Like what's he doing? Who's like, it's about UFC, I guess. Like who is he? I didn't understand. I didn't really know. And that's another thing. It didn't really draw my eye. I just wanted to watch it because it had The Rock, you know, because I don't mind The Rock. You know, I don't mind him, even though he gets a lot of hate, which I understand, but I don't mind him. But no, with a movie like this, it's just, I feel like the audience, like the general audience, just doesn't care to see something like this. Because as I'm recording this, the movie's made about $6 million at the box office and needs at least $100 million to break even. So that just shows, like, it doesn't matter what kind of reviews the thing's getting. You know, I know it's getting mixed reviews right now, as you can see here, but it doesn't really matter when the audience, you know, no one cares. No one wants to watch it. There's people who don't even want to watch The Rock. I've seen comments that they just don't care. So all of that combined, you know, I didn't know what to expect walking into this. And basically the story is about a UFC fighter named Mark Kerr. You know, he was one of the first breakout stars in the business. And obviously you have The Rock, you know, there's no helicopters, no jungle, no Vin Diesel next to him. It's just him in a dramatic, serious role. You know, and the story tries to revolve around him and his, you know, journey to the top of the MMA, you know, UFC fighting, along with his battle with, you know, his crazy Mary Jane like girlfriend, along with the drug addiction that he had throughout his career. Now look, the director of this movie is Benny Safdie, and if you don't know who he is, I understand, right? The movie that I know him from would be Uncut Gems, where, you know, you had Adam Sandler and Kevin Garnett. Even though I haven't watched it, you know, that's the only movie I know that he's done. The other ones, I mean, kind of random. And obviously for the actors, there's not really a lot of notable ones. You have The Rock, you have Emily Blunt, you have Ryan Bader, you know, a former fighter himself. And apparently the budget was around $40 million. But like I said, they're gonna need a lot of money just to break even. And the runtime for this movie wasn't too bad, you know, 2 hours and 3 minutes. It's actually like a breath of fresh air after going to watch one battle after another, because that was like 3 hours long. You're just sitting there like tossing and turning, you know, trying to get comfortable. And for the reviews, it had a 72% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 7.2 on IMDb, which is funny because The Long Walk somehow had higher reviews than this movie. So apparently critics will give Stephen King a standing ovation for just showing up with a pen, but The Rock fighting an addiction? Nah, man. You know, maybe I should be a critic if all it takes is glazing big names. Now, like I said, I didn't know what to expect going into this, but let's talk some pros and cons of what I liked about this movie and what I thought made it actually a pretty good movie. So let's start with The Rock, because I think that's the main talking point. Everyone was praising his performance. You know, he got a 15-minute standing ovation, and everyone was saying, you know, The Rock actually acted for once. It only took him 50 years, but he actually did it. And I agree. I think he did. You know, when he was on screen, I didn't just see him as The Rock, as you do with every other movie. I actually saw him as this Mark Kerr guy, you know, this humble but confident person, you know, who's really nice, but at the same time can get pressed and get mad and has anxiety at times and struggles with an addiction. And, you know, it's something that's relatable in a way. So I thought The Rock overall was good in this movie. You know, he was different. He did something outside the box. And while it might not be the performance of the year, it was a pretty good performance by him. And, you know, even the look that he had, you know, all the prosthetics and everything they did to his face, I thought worked really well. You know, they did a good job of trying to change him up, not make him look just like The Rock, which helped. And so are people overglazing The Rock's performance? Yeah, there are people that are overglazing it, saying that it deserves an Oscar. And am I going to go as far as say that? I'm not going to say yeah, but at the same time, I'm not going to say no. If he was nominated, I wouldn't even be mad. I'm not saying it's crazy acting, but it's a step up for what The Rock usually does. And so I think the main draw of this movie is obviously The Rock, and I think he delivers. And even like Ryan Bader, you know, someone who's actually fought in real life, you know, going to an acting scene, acting in the same movie that his sport was in. I think it's always cool to see that. And even the ending for this movie, you know, I enjoyed. It kind of went with that 127 hours type of ending where they show Mark Kerr, you know, the real life one and what he's been up to. And, you know, they give stats and stuff about what happened to him and how his life played out. You know, I think that's always a kind of interesting way to wrap up a movie, especially something like this. And look, besides that, I mean, there's nothing crazy in here, right? It's really just The Rock, maybe some action scenes in here. I will say that the movie had some stakes towards the end. It started to raise the stakes and you started to get you more invested because it felt like there was a point in the movie where there wasn't really any fighting at all. It was just his story and what he was going through. But then towards the end, they started getting back to the fighting. And I think that's where I started to get more invested again. And so, yeah, with all that being said, you know, from The Rock's acting to some of the supporting characters, to the story, how he dealt with drugs and how just the personality he had, you know, I think that's what sold me. And just learning the history of this Mark Kerr guy, you know, who he was and what he did, I thought was the best parts about the movie. But now let's get into some of the cons. And the first thing I'll say is Emily Blunt. She was literally probably the worst part about this movie. There might be people that are going to defend her and be like, bro, you didn't understand her character, bro. You didn't understand. You know what she reminded me of? It was like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, right? Mary Jane, where he's saving the city. He's fighting all these enemies. But at the end of the day, it's still about her and her problems. Bro can't have a day off. You know, his worst villain was MJ. And that's kind of like this movie. His worst villain, it was her. Like, The Rock literally got clean from drugs. Clean, rehab and everything. And somehow she was still mad he didn't bring her flowers. And the best part is she disappeared, you know, for a part of the movie. And then when he was up for a fight for a grand prize, she came back into his life. Huh, interesting. And honestly, if you look at it, like, what is Emily Blunt's best movie? Jungle Cruise? The Fall Guy? Like, if we're being honest, it's probably A Quiet Place. And you want to know why? Because she didn't have to talk. Like, honestly, what's her best movie? What is she like, dang, that movie was good? It's literally A Quiet Place. It was her. Because she zipped it. Oh, no, look, I don't know what it is, but I just didn't like her character in here. She was just insufferable. And people are going to be like, yeah, that was realistic, right? Was it, though? Because that's another thing. How do we know this movie? What is 100% real and what's 100% made up? What do they make up just to make it good? And what is actually real? Like, I'm sure Mark and his girl at the time, or whoever it was, got in fights, sure. But, like, was the story, the fights at the end, all that, how it played out, was that real? Like, what was real? That's the problem. You never know what's 100% real. So that was another thing that I just feel like you just don't know for sure. And a few more things I'll say is it's a slower movie. You know, it's a slower burn. Not necessarily boring, but it's just doesn't have like the crazy action or the comedy or the suspense. And then the last thing I'll say is, look, this movie isn't really marketable. Like, it has The Rock and he's fighting and people are glazing the movie, right? Glazing his performance. But besides that, no one really cares. People hate The Rock now. And that's what's going to drag this back, is the fact that people don't like The Rock and the fact that no one cares about the story. Like, I just feel like there's no draw for this movie, no interest at all. Maybe if you're a UFC fan, but even like me, I watched the UFC. I'm not a diehard, but I didn't even know who the guy was. So imagine a bunch of people. Like, if you're a diehard, you might know, but I just feel like the general audience won't really know. And I think that's just, the movie isn't marketable. I think that's the main thing that's going to bring this movie down is, you know, the distaste for The Rock and the fact that this movie just doesn't look interesting. But overall, look, I like this movie. You know, I think it was an actual good movie. Overall good. But for me, look, I think I'll have to give this a loaded nacho award. You know, I think it was good enough to watch in theaters, and I think you'll enjoy yourself if you do. But anyways, guys, those are just my thoughts. Comment below if you've seen this and what you think, and if you agree or disagree. You know, I'd be very curious to know. But with that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.